Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming and how to play evil characters. Now, it's a very broad topic, how to play evil, so let's break it down a little right off the bat. It's how to play evil without being disruptive, how to play evil as part of a party without constantly falling into PvP traps where you're constantly stabbing at each other, betraying each other, and so on. And this video is timely for a couple of reasons. One, I've had this request for about 2 months and I've been sitting on it, thinking it over. But two, as a lot of you are already aware, in the coming weeks, the Monster Kingdoms RPG, which I've developed, is going to be released on BackerKit for people to participate in the crowdfunding of the deluxe version of that game. And Monster Kingdoms is a game in which you play monsters in a world where evil has won. Heroes are very much pushed to the fringe, if not extinguished entirely, and your characters will more often than not be pursuing malevolent ambitions. You may well be trying to tame monsters to fill your dungeons. You may be trying to slay heroes and loot castles to enrich yourselves. You may be conquering kingdoms to claim their crowns for yourselves. You may just be mercenaries working for the highest bidder. There are a lot of different ways to play Monster Kingdoms, and if this is a game that interests you, I've described it previously as playing the Sabbat in a fantasy setting, which seems to really tick some boxes for some people. Do click that link below. It just means you'll be notified when the campaign goes live. That's all you have to do. Just click it. It might ask you to type in your email address. As soon as you've done that, boom, you'll be told when the Monster Kingdoms campaign goes live, and that helps us. It helps me, certainly, know how many people are interested in Monster Kingdoms before the campaign even starts. But this game is fully written already. Now, I released a video about Monster Kingdoms specifically last week, which you'll be able to find on this channel. But now, I wanted to talk a little more about playing evil characters, because I received a request, as often I do, via MatthewDawkins.com from Steve, who's made requests before, and for videos I've already made. Steve is one of my Patreons, which gives him the entitlement, the right to request more than one video, and so Steve is exercising that right. Wanted to know a while back how you can play evil games, or games where your characters are evil, without the constant resorting to PvP, backstabbing, betrayals, the group falling apart, or everyone getting offended very quickly. And there are some evil, there's some evil solutions to this. There's some easy solutions to this that don't require anyone breaking their back or their mind in order to accommodate them. You see, the first thing to do when looking at evil is define it within the setting. Because evil in one world is going to be very much different to another. Now, there's an argument to be made there. Is evil always relative? Is there an objective truth to what evil happens to be? But it's worth choosing your flavor of evil when you actually form the basis of your game. For instance, are your characters just ambitious without remorse? Are they ruthless? Will they cut through every single enemy? Are they manipulative or simply morally flexible? These kinds of things can inform the kinds of characters you're playing, and it's worth discussing this kind of thing with the group, or if you're writing a game, writing this out in the first place. What is deemed evil by the majority, or by the people in charge, or by the gods, or whoever it is that governs, philosophically, potentially, this world you're playing in? One of the ways of handling such things is to say, as a GM, to your group, I want this story to focus on, let's say, self-interest, or pragmatism, or ideology, rather than random cruelty or violence. And it isn't because random cruelty and violence doesn't play a part in an evil game. I think it absolutely can. Looking at Monster Kingdoms as an example, or Vampire the Masquerade if you're playing Sabbat, or indeed Curseborn. I've now been running Curseborn a lot, and the players in my games of Curseborn have routinely done things that they would have never done in a game of Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse or Vampire the Requiem for that matter, because there's no mechanical punishment for doing so. And once that is taken off, it doesn't necessarily mean that player's always going to be an asshole, but it does mean they can play characters, do things that are morally dubious or bankrupt, and the consequences of that will come through the narrative rather than a mechanical slap on the wrist. Curseborn doesn't have a mechanical slap on the wrist for playing evil. Monster Kingdoms doesn't have a mechanical slap on the wrist for playing evil. Some people like that slap on the wrist in the forms of World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness games, but our Storypath Ultra games to date don't have something like that. Now, that's not to say you can't have some kind of limit or some kind of backlash. Chaotic retaliations are a decent example of this in the world below, but chaotic retaliations, which are equivalent to paradox backlashes in Mage the Ascension, they're not punishment for doing evil things. They're punishment for overextending your power, if you like, or playing with resources you don't quite understand. So you want, I think, to find a group, if you're the GM, or indeed a player, who is interested in exploring what evil is and what the consequences of it can be. And the answer to that could, in fact, be there are no consequences in this world. There is no law. You are existing on a plane of chaos, or the kingdom in which you are playing is chaotic. Anything goes. Anarchy reigns. At which point, that itself throws up various questions. I think you can have great discussions with your group at this stage, in the planning stage of a game, of, well, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And it doesn't have to be a codified law. There doesn't need to be an enforcement, but maybe there is a belief system that runs through the setting that says murder is absolutely fine, duels are expected. That then suddenly implies that there's an honor-based system to killing. That arbitrary murder isn't fine, but duels are. But what if you're in a system or a setting where people can just go around cutting their throats and there's no higher power to punish them for that? Well, I would find that quite odd, for one thing, because bloodshed does tend to draw vengeance out from other people. But maybe the cycle of vengeance is the punishment there. There isn't going to be an arbitrator who comes in and says, you were right and you were wrong. You need to spend this many years in the mines while you can go free. Rather, the reason the cycle might ultimately break is either because one side of the vengeance cycle has fallen to bits, to being disintegrated, destroyed, or because both sides have realized, you know what, this is a hiding to nothing. We're not getting anything out of this. Again, this is the discussion stage of playing evil. If everyone is evil in a game and you want to play a game without, let's say, consequences are what make games interesting, but the consequences don't need to be punishing. Consequences should be narratively rewarding for your characters, so it all adds to the story. If you kill someone, maybe their son comes to kill you at a later date. Now, if you're always winning in these examples, let's say everyone who tries to kill you, you're basically the fastest gun in the West, you're an outlaw in this evil game, and you're always gunning down your rivals, well, maybe the consequences then is a form of ennui, a form of boredom, that there is no one better than you, and so you're constantly challenging yourself, maybe even handicapping yourself, so that there's a greater chance that someone might defeat you. Maybe, if we're looking at this from almost a Sisyphean point of view, you have formed your own punishment there, your own tragedy, in that you will never achieve satisfaction because you are the ultimate killer. I appreciate, as is always the case with these videos, they're rambly, but when I go on these rambles, they are hopefully there to inspire your ideas. Because I think the idea of playing an evil group is absolutely fine. I love playing evil characters quite often. I love playing morally grey characters and playing outright evil characters. If you're looking from a D&D alignment standpoint, I have no issue with whatsoever. so long as you're not doing it for the sake of being disruptive or for your own jollity. If you're just doing it to amuse yourself and not doing it for the sake of the story, well, I think that's more of an issue. Ultimately, my preference for RPGs, whether you're playing good, neutral, evil, lawful, chaotic, whatever, is you're telling an interesting tale. And if the only person who's finding the tale interesting is you, because you keep screwing everyone over, that's less about being evil and that's more just about being a dick. And speaking of alignments, obviously, they do form a decent framework for an evil game. If you're playing D&D, lawful evil is, of course, upholding a strict order or hierarchy, but using it for control or gain. Neutral evil is opportunistic, self-serving, but not overtly chaotic. Chaotic evil is undoubtedly more unpredictable, it's more destructive, it's harder to play such games cooperatively if everyone was chaotic evil, but they can be tempered with goals. And the good thing with alignment, and I've made an entire video on why I like alignments, is they are not straitjackets, they're not prescriptions, they don't force you to behave in a certain way. Rather, this is what your character defaults to in positions of stress or duress. So when the heat grows, a chaotic evil person may well shiv the person next to them just to get out of there. Chaotic evil doesn't necessarily mean brave. Or because they feel they're being underpaid by the king, who everyone's been serving loyally, they shiv the king and steal his crown. And that's a very Monster Kingdoms thing you could do. But just because you're chaotic evil doesn't mean you don't see your friends as your bondmates, doesn't mean you don't see your brother as your brother. You can have some tragedy in there where you have betrayed people in the past, and maybe you're trying to not necessarily atone for that, but make good in a different kind of way. Because again, the narrative consequence of being someone who stabs others in the back repeatedly is that ultimately no one will want to work with you, which is going to cut short your storyline. So, major piece of advice here. When playing evil, and this applies to an urban fantasy game as much as it does to a medieval fantasy game, is that you want to stay aligned in your party goals. Whether this is a coterie, a pack, a squad in Monster Kingdoms, evil doesn't mean disloyal. And you can still be invested in your group's success or even a friend's success. An example from the Forgotten Realms is the whole Dead Three, or Dark Three as they were, Bane, Baal, and Merkel, working together as evil adventurers, campaigning for godhood. And there may well have been times they screwed each other over, but ultimately they worked together so that they could each become deities. And at the very end, they competed against each other to see which one could become the over-deity, and none of them could. They each took their respective portfolios of power, and each one of them felt they had won. Subsequently, they would work together time and time again. They may not like each other, but they saw the benefit of loyalty to each other. In part, that's for the GM to reinforce, but it's also for the players to remind themselves of, why am I working with these people? From an out-of-character perspective, it's because if you stop, the game's going to end very shortly. But from an in-character perspective, maybe you just like these people. Maybe they're the only people who get you. Maybe you do share a common goal, the same person trained you, you work for the same government, that kind of thing. You can frame party cooperation as mutually beneficial, even if the reasons are selfish. Ultimately, if you are trying to perform some kind of heist in a contemporary setting, you're trying to rob a bank or Fort Knox or something, then everyone is going to get a little richer. Now, you can have a member of the group, you can have a rat, let's say, or someone who then betrays the rest of the gang, but that should be an NPC, ideally, because that then reinforces the loyalty of the rest of the group as they go down to hunt down that other person who stole the rest of their money. I mean, the simplest answer for why evil characters might work together is because their survival increases their chances of success and power and survival. Their group survival increases their chances of individual survival. You want to, I would suggest, embrace manipulation over conflict. Now, this is a difficult part because while you can use deception, persuasion, coercion to get what you want from each other without openly stabbing each other and shooting each other all the time, players' feelings do need to be taken into consideration. Not every single player is as quick-witted as the next. Not every single player is going to be able to come out on top of a negotiation. And so while you can leave these things down to dice rolls, it is very likely that one player is going to be less socially canny than the others at the table. And so they're often going to be on the shit end of a deal. But you can do that with each other if you all have agreement to do so. Plus, it's a different way of exploring evil against the GM, which is to say against the GM's threats. A lot of people, when they envision monstrous or evil parties, see them as rampaging slaughterers, murderers, thieves, brigands, pillagers, rapists, arsonists, and the rest. But evil can be subtle. Evil can be manipulative. This is where the best kind of Camarilla games come in my view. And I've playtested a fair amount of Monster Kingdoms, which, of course, you can pre-order. Just click the link in the video description below. Where the evil is definitely present. All the characters are monsters, but they are not bloodthirsty slaughterers. They are manipulators. They have, in one game I ran 2 weeks ago, in fact it just concluded, they were trying to get as close as they could to the king and queen of the kingdom of Brandieu, which is a kingdom of elements. And this is a very primeval kingdom. And the king and queen are incredibly paranoid. Their closest advisors are constantly being replaced. And the player characters, our protagonists, wanted to get as close to them as possible to ultimately topple them, which they successfully were about to do when the game concluded. They wanted it to leave it on a cliffhanger. Essentially, they had the king and the queen purge all of their loyal advisors, leaving only the most incompetent, and they got themselves elevated into a position of power. That's still evil without having to wield the blade yourself. So influencing NPCs, exploiting political situations, blackmailing enemies, that's all a form of evil as well. You don't have to be constantly running people through and covering yourself in blood, though that is also a fun part of being evil, I'll admit. Remember that as a player, it can be a great deal of fun to be the face. It can be a great deal of fun to play the party's negotiator, whether playing good, neutral, or evil, but especially evil. If you're the person who's seen as charming, this would be a Harlequin or a Goldsman in Monster Kingdoms, then nobody is going to see you as treacherous. Everyone's going to see you as the diplomat. You are the Littlefinger character. Now, it may blow up in your face one day, because these things often do. Not everyone gets to live a long and healthy Henry Kissinger life, despite certain acts and decisions attributed to him. But that doesn't mean you're not still evil. It's also worth keeping in mind that you can focus on schemes, not slaughter. Characters can make their long-term plans. They can form shady alliances, play the big picture game. To use the Forgotten Realms example, this is where you align with the Zentarim or the Red Wizards of Thay, where you choose a nominally evil organization and align yourself with their goals to further them in the setting you're visiting. So let's say you want to, I don't know, claim one of the Dale lands in the Forgotten Realms for the Zentarim. Maybe you are effectively secret agent characters. You're going to go to Daggerdale and you're going to work for the local mayor there who needs you to do certain things. But each time you venture out into the forest to slay this group or, I don't know, coerce that one to leave, what you're actually doing is steadily subverting the mayor of Daggerdale. Maybe you're strengthening the enemy, and maybe you're saying to the drow in the woods, we're not going to fight you. We're actually going to give you these powers. You need to stay hidden, and we'll send you a signal when it's time to emerge. And when it is time to emerge, we will all throw off the humans and elves of Daggerdale, for example. Developing secret objectives as players is a great thing to do as well. Players should negotiate their secret objectives with the GM, but it allows them to further evil causes one-on-one, rather than having to do everything in lockstep with the rest of the group. It's a risk when you play evil that you will feel like you do have to constantly align with the rest of the group without, otherwise you might upset people. Well, feel free to have one-on-one either gaming sessions or just discussions with the GM. My character really wants to do this. My character really wants to kill her stepfather, for example. Now, that may not affect the rest of the group, but that doesn't mean you can't have the occasional 5-minute scene where you are furthering that end, even with the rest of the group around you. Players should always be courteous when people want a bit of one-on-one time. And these sorts of objectives can lead to characters controlling a criminal underworld, rising in political power, building a cult. Building cults is a big aspect of Monster Kingdoms, because one of the dusks you can follow, like a philosophy path, is faith. And faith has the, I think, illusion of purity. But faith in Monster Kingdoms, it tends to be a pretty morbid cult dedicated to annihilation or sadism or the various evil religions in fantasy games. So building a cult for yourself in any RPG is a brilliant way of playing evil, and one, again, that doesn't necessarily require you to just lose your mind and kill everything in sight. Now, I keep saying don't lose your mind and kill everything in sight, or don't stab everything, don't cover yourself in blood, as if that's a restriction, and it isn't. I think if you're playing an evil game, the likelihood is, especially if it's a fantasy game, you're going to be looking at some marauders, as they are in Monster Kingdoms, barbarians, as they are in D&D, Brujah Anti-Tribu, as they are in Vampire the Masquerade, Belial's Brood, as they are in Vampire the Requiem. We could go on. There are a lot of groups that revel in bloodshed, and it's not that you should deter people from playing them. Far from it. It's up to the GM to put situations, events, scenarios in place where they can get to do that without basically harming the rest of the party. A decent player isn't going to do it anyway, isn't going to say, well, fuck it, I've not slit a throat in the last few days, so I'm going to target another player character. But each player should be rewarded for the character they want to play, with scenarios that appeal to that character's wishes, their objectives. And if that does happen to be a battlefield filled with bleeding bodies, then set it up to allow for it. Respecting player boundaries is obviously important. Respecting the GM's boundary is very important. Don't undermine player agency just because you're playing an evil character. Don't steal from the rest of the party just because you're playing an evil character. And if you are going to have solo scenes, don't do so at the expense of others. Just because your character is evil doesn't mean you, as a player, have to be a twat. And again, discussing a character concept isn't just between you and the GM. Part of making an evil party cohesive and coordinated is discussing it with each other. Why and how have you come to the point where you will work together to your aim, as I was discussing earlier? Because the point is, while you're evil in motivation, you're not incompatible with group play. What it comes down to, in the end, is your characters need to be useful, not liabilities. And if you're the GM, you need to give them the opportunity to be useful and not liabilities. Every character should be an asset to the group, even if they are morally dubious or utterly blank. The GM should offer unique possibilities, and the player should offer unique solutions that others wouldn't consider. Because evil doesn't mean incompetent, necessarily. So whether we're looking at torture or bribery, corruption, compulsion, whatever the case may be, a character that is evil will take certain steps that a character that is good will not. And these may not be fun for every single person to play, but if you're signing on for an evil game and you all agree to certain limits and what you're prepared to do, then that kind of thing can actually be a lot of fun to play through. And if it does make people feel a bit ill to do it, then discuss it afterwards and say, okay, let's not do a scene like that again, or maybe that was really cool. On the GM's part, then they should be pushing characters into moral dilemmas without turning on them. If people have signed up to play evil characters, the likelihood, it's not guaranteed, but the likelihood is they don't just want to constantly be slapped around the face with, you're bad, therefore you failed. It's the old video game evil path trick, where, at least historically, up until about Mass Effect, almost every single time you chose an evil path in a game, the game punished you in some way. The items you could unlock were less good. The experience you could earn was less voluminous. There was usually no way to complete a game in the best way if you were playing evil. And I think the reason for that is because most of us as players aren't evil, and so we don't derive as much satisfaction from that kind of ending. That's where the challenge really comes in for the GM, because you need to reward players for playing evil characters without at the same time chastising them. And if you stop chastising them completely, that's great. But remember, you might end up losing sight of what evil actually is. I don't mean out of character. You're not then just going to walk away from the game table and cut someone's brake lines. But I mean, there always needs to be a contrast. There always needs to be some consequence, as mentioned previous, for your actions. So aligning with the story is very important. Evil characters can have powerful arcs, they can have arcs of ambition, they can have arcs of revenge, or even redemption, if that's what you'd like to go for. You should work with the GM to create plot hooks that tie to your dark goals. Anti-heroes, villainous protagonists are far more interesting than edgelord loners. Now, Monster Kingdoms is a deliberately edgy game. We've taken certain artistic inspiration from the Berserk manga, for example. We want explosive violence with blood and guts and villages burning down in the distance as our villains ride away from it. We want all of that on show. But remember, your characters need to be able to work together, otherwise it's not going to be a very interesting party game. So consider characters like the Ruthless General, or the Shadow Broker, or the Mysterious Occultist, the Corrupt Noble. All of these are characters that aren't, on the face of it, utterly broken just because they are evil. They would all work whether you're running Monster Kingdoms, Dungeons & Dragons, Warhammer Fantasy, Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire the Dark Ages, pretty much any game. But again, my suggestion is, if you want to play evil, you want to play evil in a game where the setting and the system supports you doing so. So if this has interested you, if you've enjoyed this video, please do consider clicking the link in the video description below so you're notified when the Monster Kingdoms campaign goes live in about a week. I hope to see you support it. If you've got any questions for me, please post them in the comments, and by all means interact with each other. I love it when people who watch these videos actually respond to each other. It creates interesting chats. So thank you very much for watching. Do support Monster Kingdoms. Be seeing you next time.